Okay, so starting all over again, good evening, everybody. And today we're going to talk about understanding sensory issues. So today we're going to talk about what happens in sensory issues. What do we need to understand about it as parents? Okay, not about what are the strategies that we're going to use or what are the things that we're going to solve the sensory issues, but what you need to understand that what happens, what is arousal, what am I giving is right or not, what as parent I can. Okay, so sensory system, just like any other system in your body, there is a sensory system. Like we have digestive, we have cardiovascular, we have sensory system. So sensory system perceives all the types of sensations. Anything that we experience, anything that we hear, see, smell, taste, every experience is a sensory stimulus. So this stimulus is carried to the brain responds to it, and in turn, it reacts to it through motor response. So this system that carries the stimulus to the brain comprises sensory system. So quickly going through what are the 8 senses. First and foremost, it is visual. So visual system helps you in motion perception, ability to locate. So anything that we're seeing, we're discriminating, we're differentiating, we are seeing the movements, we are seeing the colors, we're seeing the perception. So visual again has a lot of components. Okay, closures, spatial awareness, then visual processing, then visual discriminations. So everything comes under the visual system. It helps to integrate with other senses. It helps in building attention and discriminating between the visual things. Auditory system. Auditory system is important. Anything that you're hearing. So many a times children are not able to respond to name calls. So name calls are directly related to the auditory system. So if those auditory systems are not in place, the muscles are not in place, or not in place doesn't mean structurally, but functionally. Okay. So if those things are not at par as they should be, then we have issues with auditory. Or some children, they react to very loud sounds in a negative way. Some children, they can perceive even the smallest of the sounds. So everything comes under auditory awareness that there's a sound, auditory localization, where the sound is coming from, auditory discrimination, what are the different sounds that I can hear. Okay, so all this comes under auditory system. Olfactory. So whatever we are smelling, whatever we are perceiving through nose, good smell, bad smell, smell is directly related to memories. So as soon as you smell something, it triggers your memory and brings back a past experience. So those children who have good smell sense, they have good memory as well. They are very directly related. But those who are having issues with perceiving the sounds, the smell, then the memory status might not be as strong. It's not that it will not be, but it might not be. Okay. Then is your gustatory system. Gustatory is your oral system. So oral system, oromotor, I'm not talking about, oral sensory system. So anything that we're tasting, anything that we're feeling in the mouth, the location of the muscles, the placements of the teeth, everything. If a food goes into my mouth, how does it taste? How does it feel? Is it a pleasant experience or not? Everything comes under gustatory system. Tactile. So tactile is, as the name suggests, touch sense. Many of our kids are having issues with tactile, many. So anything that you're having, some kids like to touch a lot, some kids avoid touching different textures, some kids just seek it, they want more and more and more. So some kids are okay with some textures, some are not okay with issues with grooming, problems with hair cutting, problems with nail cutting. So all of these things come under tactile. Hot and cold is a mixture of tactile and interoception. Even the pain. Now this is proprioceptive system. So these were the first 5 were the overt senses, the visible senses, touch, hear, smell, sight, and taste. There are other three systems in the body which form the sensory system, and they are hidden senses, but they play a huge role in regulating these systems. So the first one is your proprioceptive system. Proprioceptive system has everything to do with your body awareness, your pressure feelings, your pains, deep pains. Then where you know your body is. Body awareness means that I understand and I know and I can relate to where my body is going in space. So if I'm keeping my hand to the right, I don't need to look at it to see that my hand is going towards right. I can very well locate it. I know the spatial orientation for it. Okay, so a body awareness that where my body is going, where I'm going in the space, this comes through proprioception. And these receptors are present in the bones and the muscles, the joints. Okay, so that is why we give all the compressions and the joint compressions, because there we activate those receptors. Then comes your vestibular system. One second. Okay. Then comes your vestibular system. So vestibular has to do everything with the balance, the coordination of the body, and gait stability, and spatial orientation. So your movements, your balance, your some, if you're going taking a merry-go-round, some people feel very, very dizzy. So there your balance is lost. So that is under the control of vestibular system. If something is moving too fast, okay, and you shift your eye and then you feel a little disoriented, that is under vestibular system. So keeping your body upright, keeping it upright and maintaining the balance, that comes under vestibular. Keeping my orientation. So if I'm moving towards, something is pushing me towards left, then I have to maintain and shift the focus on the right. That comes under vestibular. The last one is interoception. So interoception is everything internal, the things that we cannot see overtly. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm discomfortable, I'm having some gut issues, I can feel my palpitations. Some people can feel their heartbeats. Some people have some discomfort, but they're not able to locate it. So the feeling of hotness, coldness, tension, stress, peace, whatever you're feeling internally is happening under interoceptive system. So now what is sensory processing? So these were the 8 senses that we need to understand, and I hope all of you must be aware of it. So I'm quickly rushing through that so that I can concentrate on the main things. So sensory processing is when you receive something from the environment and it goes to the brain, where it is interpreted and it is the useful perceptions are made. Sensory processing disorder, or SPD, is when there is a problem with detection or modulation or interpretation, which brings a response which is not usually typical. Which response we expect from a typical person, okay, that response is not generated, but a different response is generated. It can be less, it can be more, it can be a different response altogether. And this might affect the functionality of the routine. This might affect the activities that the child is doing. So as the pioneer therapist, occupational therapist has put it, E.G. Ryers, she has termed it as neurological traffic jam. So some signals are not received or perceived properly by the brain. So when we talk of, this is Miller's classification, when we talk of classifying sensory processing disorders, we do it under 3 heads for the ease: sensory modulation disorder, sensory discrimination disorder, and sensory based motor disorder. So sensory modulation means how it is perceived. Upar ya niche, we modulate the voice. So upar niche we can do. So there can be 3 responses that can be generated from here: sensory over responsive, sensory under responsive, and sensory seeker. So sensory over responses is anything, any stimulus will be more felt more. The response generated to the stimulus will be more than a typical response. Okay, so if my typical response is A, more is B, and less is C. So a sensory over responsive person will give the response B. A sensory under-responsive will give the reaction C. So suppose I have been touched on my hand like this. Okay, a little tap. So for over-responsive, it will be like a slap. And then it like, ouch, it hurts. Okay, but for under-responsive, it might just feel like a feather touch. He is not going to feel as much and not respond as much. For the seeker, he will like it. Keep giving more. Okay, so sensory over-responsive, sensory under-responsive, and sensory seeker. In sensory discrimination disorder, there is a problem that I'm not able to differentiate what am I feeling. So something touched on my hand, okay, and suppose the eyes are closed. So I cannot discriminate what touched my hand. Or I'm confused at times. We'll be taking the questions in the end if we have time, otherwise in the question and answer session. So sensory discrimination or disorders, they have issues discriminating between the senses or discriminating between the stimulus of the same sense. Sensory based motor disorders. Okay, let me move on through these slides. So as we talked, over responsive, under responsive, and craving. Okay, over responsive, overreactions to touch. We feel they are overreactions, they're not actually overreactions, but that is how the system is perceiving the stimulus. It's not that the child is overreacting to it, but that's how the stimulus is perceived. So suppose I do this little tap on my table. So this stimulus might be perceived by somebody as a very loud thud. But for an under-responsive child, it will be a very low sound. For craving, he will want to do it continuously. Okay, so it is not that a child is overreacting or not bothered, but it is the differences in the sensory system that how they are perceiving it. Sensory-based motor disorders, dyspraxia. So I'm sure you must have come across the term dyspraxia and apraxia. So dyspraxia has issues with motor planning. Okay, ideation, planning, and execution. All three come under dyspraxia. Generally speaking, to understand it, when the children are having issues with balance, when they're having problems with coordinations, then they have dyspraxia, or they cannot plan things. They have issues in motor planning. So if I have a circuit, and sometimes I have to go down, sometimes I have to go up, sometimes I have to jump, and they are having difficulty doing it in a fluent way, in a fluid motion. So that problem, that coordination issues come under this particular sensory-based motor disorder. Then postural disorder. When there is a problem in maintaining erect posture, maintaining the body gaits, body postures, the child wants to lie down all the time. The child who feels like he doesn't want to do anything and just wants to be lazy all day long might be most likely having sensory-based postural disorder. Then sensory discrimination, as we discussed, there is an issue, difficulty perceiving sensory input or differentiating between the sources of two stimuli. Now, why sensory system is important? So if we see this pyramid of learning, when we learn, so there is a hierarchy in which we learn, right? So when we, the importance of sensory, whenever you visit your therapist, so they'll tell you first work on sensory, go to OT. First and foremost, they'll tell you go to OT, get the child settled. And then we will move on to other things. Why is so? That is because this pyramid of learning will explain it. So sensory forms the foundation of all the learning skills. Okay, as you can see on the base here, different sensory systems. Okay, all the sensory systems form the base of pyramid of learning. Then you move on to sensory motor development. Okay, body schemes, reflex maturation, awareness, posture control, and everything. Then perceptual motor development, the finer things, the eye-hand coordination, ocular control, motor control, postural adjustments, visual spatial awareness. So all the perceptual motor development, that is, which are going to develop in response to the sensory motor development. And then finally comes the cognitive intellect. So behavior, academic learning, and activities of daily learning. So this is the hierarchy in which we all learn, be it neurotypical or be it neurodiverse. Even in neurotypicals, they are perceiving through different senses, they are understanding through different senses, they explore through different senses, and then they convert that learning to further higher skills. They perceive something, they react to it, they understand what it is, they further groom their skills, motor skills, and then they move on to higher cognitive skills. Okay, this one is Dune's model. So here there is another category, low registrations. Let's try to understand this table. So when you see here these two arrows, there is low neurological threshold and this is high neurological threshold. So high threshold means that I can take a lot of sensory inputs before I can actually react to it. Okay, or maybe I like it. So in these two categories fall low registrars or sensation seekers. So kids who are not able to register as much, there were three categories that we saw. One was over responsive, under responsive, and seekers. Apart from that, this is another model by Dune, the sensory profiling that we do routinely. So this is the model that is followed. Low registers where the stimulus is not registered as it should be. Probably they don't feel it as much. They're not able to register it as much as it should be. Okay. And sensory seekers. So I want more of it. My threshold is higher. I like it. So both of them fall in high threshold. And in the low neurological threshold, sensory avoiders. So if I get some sensation, I want to avoid it. I don't like it. My threshold is low. I don't like exposure. Another one is sensitive, over responsive. So anything that I'm getting, I don't want to do it because it generates a lot of response in my body, which I don't like. Okay. So both of them are negatively reacting to it and have a low threshold. So different behavioral strategies are used, passive and active, based on that. Now, talking of arousal levels. So all of you must have heard of arousal levels. Here, I would like to interrupt my PPT and I would like input from the parents. What do you understand by arousal levels? Anyone? So no one has heard this term ever before?
Ma'am, maybe it's the level where the child start reacting to something.
Okay. You can just unmute and say also. Arousal means child active. Okay, so child active or child overactive or child underactive? Activity can be in different at different levels. Active, taking interest with surroundings. Okay, so when we talk of arousal, arousal is the state where you are paying most attention, state of being alert, where I can concentrate on what is happening, where I can pay attention to what is happening. Now that I'm giving the presentation, all right. So if any of you are sleepy, probably you had your lunch and you're sleepy, and maybe some of you are having a cup of tea to wake up your mind, or maybe a cup of coffee. So some might be in under aroused state, not able to pay as much attention. Some might be doing some exercise or gymming and they are, already in an over aroused state, that they're still distracted with a lot of things. So both the states are not the optimal arousal levels. The optimal person would be like sitting right in front and sitting, paying attention to what is happening. So the exact state where you can be alert, where you can pay attention, that is the state of optimal arousal. And this is what we intend to achieve by giving all the sensory activities. This is the zone where we want the children to be. We want them to pay attention. We want them to listen. We want them to concentrate. We want them to observe and be attentive. So this is the zone where they have to come. So when we see this chart, now see this diagram, okay? Let me. So here, when we see, one second, I spotlight. Yeah. So this is the state of decreased arousal. Here we already have the ideal one, okay? The optimal level where it should be for the kid to be attentive and alert. Now, if the arousal is less, it can be as less that the child can fall asleep, then under aroused, not enough to pay attention at all. Decreased, he can pay, but he's losing focus time and again. From here, if we give some sensory modulations, that we can increase the arousal. Okay, so some activities that increase the arousal of the child, that will bring him to ideal arousal levels. A child then moves on to increased arousal. If you keep giving, or a child who's already in the increased arousal zone, his modulation will be to decrease the arousal level and bring it to optimal. Now, if the child is an over aroused, like overexcited and overstimulus, which we usually see in the evenings. So from the whole day, the child is accumulating the sensory stimulus, accumulating the sensory experiences. And by the time they reach evening, they're jumping all over the house, or maybe not still, maybe shouting a lot, or maybe craving and bouncing on jump ball all the time, or maybe on the swing all the time. So that time they reach the over aroused levels, because if we have not given them the sensory diets time and again throughout the day, the sensory stimulus is going to accumulate and make the arousal levels go high. Okay, and then comes the stage, extreme crisis. This comes a stage of sensory meltdowns. So when this child reaches this particular red zone after the over aroused, then we experience the sensory meltdowns. There is no sensory strategy that can bring down the meltdown. So you will just have to let the child calm down, go through the rage phase. Once the child goes through the rage phase, then he can be calmed down. No matter how much talking you do at that time, no matter how much you hug that time, the meltdown will go through its phases. Okay. Once the child is a little better, is out of that rage phase, then he starts de-escalating. And then if you give sensory modulation, then he moves towards the ideal arousal level again. Okay. So these things are important to understand, because what we usually see is that I'm taking my child to OT session, okay, 45 minutes in a day in the evening, but it's not helping him too much, because sensory issues or sensory diet is not a one-time thing. You don't eat your meal in one time a day, right? You take your breakfast, you take your lunch, you take your dinner, and you take in between snacks, your tiffins and in between meals. So how can sensory diet be just one time? It has to be divided all through the day according to the needs of the child. It might not be for all the children, but as per the need of the child, the sensory diet has to be given just like your food, your diet. That is why the term sensory diet will be coming to it. So this particular thing is important to understand, because not every input is making me calm. Now, when the arousal level is too high, we have to do the calming strategies. When the arousal level is too low, we have to do the alerting strategies. Now, sometimes the problem comes that my child is going to OT regularly. He's been taking OT from 6 months regularly, 1 year regularly probably, but his issues are not settling. Why? One thing, of course, regularity, consistency. Secondly, whether he's getting the whole day sensory diet or not. Third, maybe we're giving him the input, but it is not calming him down. The input might be causing arousal level for him. So that is increasing the arousal level of the child from maybe low to optimal to high. Okay. So if that arousal level is not coming to the optimal range, it is unlikely that the child will be settled. That is why we see that he is not getting. Now, the child needs proprioception. It has been seen by the tests conducted and observation, the child needs proprioception. So we are giving gym ball compression. Still, the child is not settling. Sometimes you have to change the type of input as well. So the child needs proprioception, but gym ball compression does not calm him down enough. So it's not that I keep giving, but it is not happening. Try changing the inputs. There are different strategies. There are different exercises that you can do with the child, or ask your therapist that what do I do? This particular thing doesn't settle my child. So whenever you do any sensory activity, whenever you do the sensory sessions, what you need to observe, I tell all my parents to do this. Whenever I give them a sensory activity, that please see how the child is reacting after this particular activity, whatever I want them to observe, whether he's calming down or not. Okay, so it is the after effect that matters. We are not just giving the inputs, we are not just doing the exercises, we are not just taking him to sessions. We want the child to come to the optimal zone, optimal functional arousal levels, and optimal functional state. So if that is not happening, then we need to see whether the child is actually coming to that zone or not. Some might be aroused, some might need arousal, and some might need calming. So whatever the input the child needs, we need to see whether he or she is getting it right or not. Now, usually, like I mentioned, gym ball compression calms down children, but it might not be so for all the children. Okay, there are kids I've seen who get hyper after getting gym ball compression. So changing the input for them makes all the difference. You just change the type of input and they are much more settled. So after every activity, please observe whether your child is more settled or not, more concentrating or not, has better attention or not, and for how long. So every activity has to be judged on those parameters. So like I was saying, think and understand. Okay, we know the senses, we know why we are doing it. So we know the arousal zones. We know that if the child is over aroused, we need to calm him down. If the child is under aroused, we need to pump him a little and make him more alert. So if my activities are matching, if I'm giving this, then this is how the child reacts. If I'm giving this, then this is how the child reacts. So you need to join the missing pieces. And as I mentioned, it is not a one-time thing that you just take the child to 45-minute session and he will be good for the whole day. No, not necessary. So as parents, the first and foremost thing that you have to do is to think and understand what is happening with my child. Then sensory diet. So please ask your therapists, what should I do in the home for the child? After your session is over, after what interval do I need to do and what activities do I need to do? Because as the word suggests, it's a diet. So diet doesn't go in one time in the day. It has to be eaten in small phases to maintain the proper body functions. So likewise, sensory has to be given in the same way. When this child is going to the school, we need to give him sensory breaks. Okay, when he's coming back from the school, just before going to the school. So as per the child needs, we need to provide him that dose or the diet to function appropriate. So chart out, that if I do this activity, then my child is attentive for this much time. Then after this, if I do this, ideally, if you do say 10 minutes of activity in 2.5 hours, it serves good for the kids high on sensation. Then self-regulation. This is another thing that you need to teach to the child. So self-regulation is the ability to adjust or regulate the level of alertness. Sometimes now, after I've given the therapy for a good amount of time, I also need to start teaching the child simultaneously what he can do to recognize what is the state he is in and how he can regulate it. Now, suppose, what do? We as neurotypicals, so if you're feeling too much stressed, okay, we will just probably go out, take a walk, or listen to the music, or maybe lie down for some time. So we are regulating ourselves. This is self-regulation. The same thing has to be taught to the children. They're just not learning on their own. This has to be taught to them. So self-regulation has to be taught to the child. He needs to stop and think, what am I feeling? Okay, or how am I reacting? Then ask, how does my body feel? Then you have to give him different strategies. The child should be taught these strategies and then maybe given some placards or visual cues to choose between the options what you want to do, just to train him. And then gradually, children learn. Some children, they learn, and when they feel that the body needs some proprioceptive input, they'll ask for probably some jump ball or probably ladder or something like that. So kids start asking whenever they need. And if they are too overwhelmed or they're feeling that they're over aroused, then they'll start saying that I need to take a walk, or I need to go to a quiet corner, or I need to listen to the music, or I need to put the headphones, or I just need to lie down. Okay, so they start understanding and they start telling you that this is what I need to do. Now, mindful parenting. So this is for us as parents. We very easily say that, child is showing behaviors. Behaviors do not come just on their own. Sensory plays a very big role in some of the behaviors. It is not the only cause of behaviors, of course, but yes, a major component that can lead to behaviors. So before you, treat the child and just simply put a tag that he's having behavior issue, please try and understand what can be happening with my child. Then conscious discipline, that is positive discipline, positively talking to them, positively rephrasing everything. We just tell the children, don't do this, no, no. Don't focus on the no's. Focus on what should be done and what they should do. So if the child is throwing something, so instead of saying don't throw that, put it on the table, put it on the floor. Don't keep running. I want you to sit down. Can we try sitting down? Let's sit down. Okay, so just tell the child what is the expected behavior. So this is conscious disciplining, telling the child what is expected out of them and what is to be done, rather than telling them just what is not to be done, and the child is just hanging in the middle. What am I supposed to do? I'm not supposed to do this, but what am I supposed to do? So teach the children what they're supposed to do in particular environment or particular situation. So you have to be very, very thoughtful and very critical, plus be like a detective. This is happening to my child at this point of time. I gave this probably or this input or something, and gradually you will see the child is getting integrated. The sensories do get integrated. Here and there, waxing and weaning happens. But then as a parent, you do learn strategies yourself, and you can give those strategies to the child without any help from the therapist. And then you learn that, okay, if I do this, my child settles down after that. Or this is his particular need. So if I give 15 minutes of this exposure, he is good. Okay. So learn side by side, please. And last but not the least, be creative and have fun. There is no rule book which says that this activity has to be done in a serious mode and you cannot have fun. No. You can have all the fun that you want. You can make it as funny as possible. You can be with them. You can engage with them. If it is messy play, you can play with them. Nobody's stopping you. And if a book says that this particular textures are required, you can always try your own. You can always make your own games. Anything that your child enjoys and anything that your child likes. Liking just doesn't mean that giving him anything that he likes, but of course, anything that makes him bring to the optimal zone. Okay. So the whole idea of doing this parent empowerment program is that we should understand as parents what is happening in those areas and what we are supposed to take care of. So summarizing it, we all know that there are 8 senses. We now know the sensory processing disorder, how it is classified, what are the arousal zones, and what do I need to observe when I'm giving a particular sensory activity to my child. So this is the takeaway from today's section. I hope it was helpful. Now we are open to questions.
Neha, I have a question. This is Ratna here from Hyderabad. See, how hypotonia and hypotonia affect sensory processing? Could you please throw some light on that?
See, hypertonia and hypotonia are body muscle tones. Okay, you cannot change the tones. You can only change the strength of the muscles. And sensory can affect them, and in fact vice versa, because you see in sensory based motor disorders, okay, you have the postural disorder also, where there is less of postural control. So hypotonia plays a huge role there. Yes, definitely they are vice versa affecting, because if I have low muscle tone, if I have high muscle tone, I might not be able to experience sorry, who's Somebody is on mute. So if I'm not able to experience as much as I should, or experiencing more than what I should, it will definitely affect. And if my sensories are not proper, if I'm not perceiving proper, my motor response might not be appropriate. So it is affecting both ways.
So it affects cognition also, right?
Yes.
Then, okay.
Of course, see, the better will be your physical development, the better will be your sensory system, your cognition is going to be definitely better.
Thank you so much.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello, ma'am.
This is Nidhi from Mumbai. मेरा 9 साल का बेटा है, उसका वो डाउन सिंड्रोम कंडीशन है, प्लस उसका ASD भी डायग्नोस हुआ है, डुअल डायग्नोसिस। तो अभी मैं इसका अभी कुछ दिनों से वो सेंसरी प्रोटोकॉल मतलब विलबर्गर्स ब्रशिंग टेक्निक कर रही हूँ, पर अभी ये 1 महीने से ये एक बिहेवियर दिखा रहा है कि रूम के कॉर्नर में जाके वो यूरिन पास आउट करता है। तो ये बिहेवियर इशू रहे, इसको बोलेंगे या सेंसरी कैटेगरी में जाएगा जैसे ये चीज?
सेंसरी कैटेगरी में वो टॉयलेट ट्रेंड है।
हाँ, ऐसे वो बताता था कि मेरे को मतलब यूरिन मतलब मेरे को बाथरूम जाना है तो ही पॉइंट्स, ही इज नॉट विजिबल अभी तक। तो पता था बाथरूम की तरफ जाता था, और अभी डेफिनेटली मतलब वो जानबूझ के वो उसी कॉर्नर रूम का 2 फिक्स कॉर्नर पकड़ लिया है उसने, और वहीं पे बैठता है। और उसको जैसे मैं देखती हूँ कि वो बैठ रहा है, उसको तुरंत लेके जाती हूँ बाथरूम में, पर वहां नहीं करता, वहां से वापस आके फिर वो उसी कॉर्नर पे जाके वो यूरिन पास करता है।
और ये विलबर्गर से क्या रिलेशन है? जस्ट उसके बाद हो रहा है?
नहीं, अभी विलबर्गर्स एक्चुअली मैंने कुछ दिनों से बंद किया है क्योंकि इसको बहुत काफी सर्दी और बुखार वगैरह थी। 1 महीने से बंद किया, ये मतलब समझ लीजिए वो बंद किए उसके बाद से ही शुरू है, ऐसा बोल सकते हैं।
सच कोई डायरेक्ट रिलेशन तो नहीं है, इट मोस्ट लाइकली विल बी बिहेवियर कि उसको वहां पे जाके फॉर सम रीजन ही स्टार्टेड डूइंग इट, प्रॉब्ली उसको अटेंशन मिला या कुछ उसका डिमांड में हुआ या कुछ उसको ग्रेटिफिकेशन मिला, मे बी इन द सेंस दैट ही गॉट अ नेगेटिव रिस्पांस एंड अटेंशन। सो बिहेवियर किस वजह से डेवलप हुआ है, सबसे पहले हमें वो देखना पड़ेगा कि उसका कारण क्या है, वेदर सेंसरी है या अटेंशन है या एस्केप है या कोई ग्रेटिफिकेशन है। तो वो रीजन देखने के बाद वी कैन एक्चुअली से कि बिहेवियर क्यों आया है, बट एज सच विलबर्गर और इसका कोई डायरेक्ट लिंक नहीं।
हाँ, क्योंकि मैं अटेंशन भी मैंने पहले इग्नोर भी करना शुरू किया क्योंकि क्या पता मुझे ये जानबूझ के अटेंशन सीकिंग के लिए कर रहा है, तो भी उसको मतलब कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ा, वो फिर से वही चीज रिपीटेडली कर रहा है। मतलब
आप उससे क्लीन करवाइए, लेट हिम क्लीन आफ्टर डूइंग इट, लेट हिम डू इट। जब वो 2-3 बार खुद करेगा तो कई बार बच्चे को फिर वो चीज छोड़ सकते हैं। लेट हिम मॉप इट, लेट हिम वॉश हिज क्लोथ्स एंड देन प्रॉब्ली यू विल गेट रिड ऑफ इट।
तो जैसे कॉर्नर में जा रहा है तो वो सेंसरी इशू नहीं होता है, मतलब
जरूरी नहीं है, ही इज जस्ट चोजन वन कॉर्नर, उससे कोई मतलब नहीं।
ठीक है, ओके, थैंक
यू। एक्सक्यूज मी मैम।
यस मैम।
मैम मेरी डॉटर का पहले हम जहाँ पे ओटी के लिए लेके जाती थी मैं, अभी हमारा ट्रांसफर हुआ था तो मैंने चेंज कर दिया, तो वो मतलब ऐसे पॉइंट्स प्रेस वाली थेरेपी करते थे उसकी, और डिफरेंट टेक्सचर उसके हाथ पे टच करते थे। तो अभी वो थेरेपी बंद हो चुकी है, लेकिन वो क्या करती है अपने हाथों को जिससे लेट जाती है और ऐसे ऐसे रब करती रहती है ऐसे, और ऐसे अब स्टार्ट कर दिया उसने अपने नाक के पास ऐसे ऐसे करना कुछ, और हाथों को टच बहुत ज्यादा
आई
करने लगी
थिंक
है।
आप मेरे को दिखा रहे हैं कैसे करती है,
राइट मैम, ऐसे पॉइंट्स प्रेस करते थे जैसे मेरे सामने ही होती थी थेरेपी, और डिफरेंट टेक्सचर्स उसके हाथ पे रब करते थे। तो अभी वो क्या करती है, जैसे लेट जाती है और अपने हाथों को ऐसे ऐसे करती रहती है लेट के, और मतलब अपने नाक के पास भी कई बार ऐसे करती है वो ऐसे, और कुछ चीजों को भी ऐसे देखने लग जाती है फिर वो, मतलब बहुत ज्यादा नहीं बट फिर भी, लेकिन हाथों के साथ उसका टच कुछ ज्यादा ही पड़ गया है, अपने हाथ को ही मतलब।
प्रेस भी करती है या सिर्फ आईज के आगे ऐसे देख रही होती है?
नहीं मैम, अगर लेटी है नहीं भी देख रही है तब भी शायद ऐसे करने लग जाती है।
हाँ, तो लेटी है, खाली है, आइडल एंगेजमेंट है, मतलब आइडली कुछ कर नहीं
मैम
रही है,
पहले ऐसा कुछ नहीं करती थी वो, ये जब थेरेपी बंद हुई है उसके बाद से कर रही है।
कुछ तो उसको वहां से इनपुट पे मिल रहा होगा जो उसको प्रॉब्ली
और
अच्छा लग
जैसे
रहा
अगर मैंने अगर हाथ अलग अलग कर दिया ना तो अपने थंब को ऐसे ऐसे मूव करती है, और कई बार मेरे हाथ के बीच में जैसे अपना हाथ घुसाने की कोशिश करती है ऐसे कि आप कर दो इसको।
तो अगर आप उसे रूटीन में थोड़ा सा स्क्रबिंग या कुछ प्रेशर यहाँ पे हैंड्स पे दे देते हैं तो क्या ये सॉर्ट आउट हो रहा है?
नहीं मैम, हो नहीं रहा सॉर्ट आउट। वो फिर मतलब अगर मैंने करके रुक गई हूँ तो उसके बाद थोड़ी बाद वो फिर खुद से कर लेती है।
जब खाली बैठी है?
जी मैम।
और उसका आइडल टाइम एंगेजमेंट नहीं है अभी?
मैम समझी नहीं मैं, आइडल
मतलब
टाइम
जब खाली
एंगेजमेंट है?
बैठी, हाँ जी, जब वो खाली बैठी होती है तो सेल्फ अपने आप को एंगेज कर पाती है किसी चीज में कंस्ट्रक्टिवली?
मैम कई बार कर भी लेती है बट कई बार नहीं भी करती। जैसे फ्री लेट गई है वो जाके अंदर रूम में किसी चीज के लिए, मैंने बोला आप बैठो मैं लेके आती हूँ, या वेट कर रही है किसी चीज के लिए, या अगर सपोज मैं नहीं हूँ, मैं नहाने गई हूँ या कुछ करने गई हूँ तो फ्री टाइम में वो ऐसे करेगी। या फिर उसका माउथिंग का इशू है तो सेकंड वो चलता है।
हाँ, तो वो उसने स्टेमिंग बिहेवियर्स ये बना लिए हैं कि जब वो खाली बैठी है कुछ और नहीं करना है तो ये कर लेते हैं। तो ट्राई करिए कि जब भी वो खाली जाके बैठ रही है तो उसको मिनिमल फ्री टाइम मिले और सेल्फ एंगेजमेंट स्ट्रेटजीज उसको सिखानी।
और एक मैम जैसे मैं उसको बुक्स दे देती हूँ कि चलो आप बुक्स देखो, तो उसमें बुक्स फाड़ने वाला बिहेवियर भी है कि मैं वो समझाती हूँ इसको कि नहीं इसको फाड़ना नहीं है, इसको फाड़ना नहीं है, इसको फाड़ना नहीं, चीजें समझती भी है लेकिन फिर जब
replace, give her newspaper as an option, वो रेडी रखेंगे कि if you want to tear you tear this, not the books. अगर उसको टीयरिंग करना भी है तो वी विल टेल कि आप क्या टीयर कर सकते हो और क्या टीयर नहीं कर सकते।
राइट।
और हम बुक्स देख के बच्चे को बिठा रहे हैं बट हमें एग्जैक्टली नहीं पता कि बच्चा उसमें इंटरेस्टेड है या नहीं, सो दोस थिंग्स यू नीड टू ऑब्जर्व कोर्स।
थोड़ी देर देखती है मैम, थोड़ी देर देखती है फिर उसके बाद वो उसको टेयर कर, मतलब ऐसा टीयर नहीं, जैसे वो ओपन करने के चक्कर में अगर टीयर हो गया तो वो उसको निकाल लेगी फिर बाहर।
हाँ, तो जब उसका आपने देख लिया कि इतना ही थ्रेशोल्ड है कि वो आधे घंटे तक या 15 मिनट तक ही बुक्स को एंजॉय कर रही है, देन यू नीड टू कीप अ सेट ऑफ एक्टिविटीज फॉर हर फ्री टाइम कि पहले ये बुक्स देख लो, फिर जैसे ही आपको लगे कि 20 मिनट्स इज डन देन यू टेल हर इफ शी कैन सी द क्लॉक। अगर उसको क्लॉक देखनी आती है तो आफ्टर 20 मिनट्स स्विच टू दिस एक्टिविटी, देन स्विच टू दिस एक्टिविटी। और थोड़ा सा उसको खुद को कंस्ट्रक्टिवली जब एंगेज करना आ जाएगा तो ये सारे स्टिमिंग बिहेवियर्स कम हो जाते हैं। ये बेसिकली स्टिमिंग हो रही है।
माउथिंग के लिए जैसे उसको अगर हम च्यू ट्यूब देते हैं क्योंकि उसकी हैंड बाइटिंग का इशू भी है, वो जा नहीं रहा है, बहुत कुछ कर लिया हमने, तो उसके लिए हम जैसे च्यू ट्यूब भी देते हैं तो वो खुद से ले लेती है, वो सेल्फ रेगुलेटरी में वो उठा लेती है कि अगर उसको लग रहा है कि च्यूइंग का मन है उसका तो वो लेती है। लेकिन जैसे बाकी चीजें भी फिर माउथिंग के टाइम पे उसकी, जैसे अब आजकल एक छोटा सा एरोप्लेन वाला टॉय है तो उसका जब वो मतलब उसका व्हील को रोटेट करती है और टंग पे फील करती है उसको, जब नहाने भी भेजती हूँ मैं उसको तो वाटर का जो मतलब फ्लो है उसके नीचे अपनी टंग को फील करती है, मतलब टंग पे उसको फील करती है।
तो उसके लिए आप ओरल सेंसरी दे रहे हैं उसे?
मैम ओरल मसाजेस तो चल रही है उसकी।
खाली ओरल मसाज से नहीं होता ना मैम, सेंसरी सिस्टम चेक करके आपको देखना पड़ेगा कि बच्चे को एग्जैक्टली क्या हमें इनपुट देना है अगेन ओरल सेंसरी।
ओके,
सो वर्क ऑन हर ओरल सेंसरी, ये सारे वहां से इश्यूज आ रहे हैं, प्लस चेक ऑन प्रोप्रियोसेप्शन।
ओके मैम।
ये दोनों कंपोनेंट्स यहाँ पे प्ले कर रहे हैं।
राइट मैम, थैंक यू।
Anything else or shall we close it? iPhone, you raised your hand.
Yeah. Good evening, ma'am. My name is Sandhya.
evening,
So, I work with special children. But what late, I just had a few doubts which I have spoken to little specialists and doctors. But I still have a little bit of clarity. So, I have three doubts. One is I just want to understand if children who are diagnosed with spectrum, what is that relativity that they have for food aversion or picky eaters? So, is there any biological cause or is there any methodology that I can apply to help my children, because they become very, very resistant to food? And I have seen one of my child not eating a particular food because he wanted French fries. So French fries in a certain shape and model, and should be fried in a certain way, the texture of it. I'm not understanding, because he was not willing to eat anything for next 2 hours solid without water, and he was continuously melting down and he was not coming. So why this food aversions or picky eating thing? What is the cause and how can I help him? And this is with quite few other kids also.
Okay.
And one of my child is also having high functioning autism. I just want to understand, can high functioning autism be combined with gifted IQ? Is there a possibility?
Very much.
Or is it a rare choice?
Yes, we just had this session before last session in which Dr. Lalit mentions about Savant syndrome. So there is a high chance of doing it, but of course there is not, the ratio is not too high, but yes, the good IQ is a definite possibility. 7 syndrome is a rare possibility.
Right, right. So color of
Uh,
the food can be a trigger.
Let me come to the food aversion part. First, I'd like to know your field of expertise, please.
Special ed, ma'am. I work with all the disability, learning disability, ASD, and ADHD because it's a school, so we have all the children along with the, lower IQ. I mean, only mild IQs and also a little bit of Down syndrome, but in a milder version.
All right, all right. See, food aversions can be happening because of few reasons. First can be your oral sensory, of course. So a child can be hyposensitive, a hypersensitive, or mixed, or like we talked about all the sensory things. Okay, the same thing happens in your mouth as well. So if a child is not feeling anything, feeling the food texture or feeling the food taste, he will not be inclined to eat. That is also one reason of aversion. Second, your over responsiveness or your hypersensitivity. If I eat something and it produces too much of sensation in my mouth, I don't want to eat it. Third, and most commonly which comes, is tactile defensiveness. So in tactile defensiveness, sometime at some point of the time, the child was probably force fed for something. And that is one of the major reasons for developing the food aversions in our kids. Okay, so if he was force fed and then probably the parent offered something which he liked eventually, and then they got stuck on this particular French fries, which is particularly made in a certain way and something. So what you will do is you will change one component at a time. Okay, so if we're talking about texture, taste, or color, we will touch taste in the end. So we might just start shifting the color a bit. Please mute yourself. So we will just change one component at a time, like color or texture or taste. So go for taste in the end. Maybe change the texture slightly or the color slightly. When the child starts accepting it gradually, then you move on to changing the different things. So fries can probably just a little change in shape because he's too fixated on everything, the shape, the way it should be done. So start by just changing this shape of the fries. Or if he's eating the potato fries, okay, you can also try sweet potato fries. So everything will be same. Here we are changing the component. So we have to try out, but change only one thing at the time. Either you change the color, or you change the texture, or you change the taste. Okay. Then food chaining. So something that the child likes, something that he's really, really fond of, you pair up those two things. He likes those French fries in a particular way, give him those French fries, add a little food that you want to introduce. Right? So try these two things, and most probably the child will gradually get it there.
Got it, ma'am. So we cannot suddenly follow a balanced diet because we don't know what is triggering the child. And every time when we are with the child, we understand this he doesn't prefer. And ma'am, this restriction that they have towards food, how severe can it get? Like, can we, is there any time frame that, okay, if I keep changing the texture, color, and then last comes the taste, is there any time frame after a certain period of time he might be okay? Or the food choice will be restricted only for a longer period?
No. I've had many kids who had food aversions and who were picky eaters, but it took us good, it usually takes at least 6 months, 8 months to get them tasting new foods, at least 4 to 5 varieties. And once they're doing it, then they move on very quickly.
Right. Got it, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, with this question, we come to the end of the session. I hope it was helpful to you all, and we'll be meeting you. Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, I wrote the question in my chat box. I just want to know,
Yes,
ma'am, if there is any sensory issues if rising, but after sometimes if we settle that, but after 1 year or 6 months, if same sensory issues can be raised.
Yes, जैसे मैंने आपको बताया था कि waxing and waning of sensory. Okay, so waxing means जब बढ़ रहा है, waning means जब कम हो रहा है, ठीक है? तो ये हो सकता है, और वो क्यों हो सकता है, बहुत सारे reasons पे depend करता है. Maybe the child is too much free, maybe there is an environmental change that has affected it adversely, maybe he got too much of inputs. कभी-कभी what happens, we keep on giving OT even when before we realize that the child has now come to a nearly optimal zone. and that is difficult to figure out at times. Okay, when the child is in the nearly optimal zone and we still keep on giving the sensory inputs, we send the child to over arousal. Then wahan se again we have to bring him back. So that is why judgment.
My child has said that continuously tapping his hand on table, and by the second hand he's writing something. So by writing something, जो लिख रहा है, जो भी लिख रहा है या कुछ ड्रॉ कर रहा है, उसको देख के वो इतना खुश हो रहा है कि वो कंटिन्यूसली टैपिंग हिज हैंड ऑन हिज माउथ. सो एंड ओनली दैट व्हेन ही इज द फ्री, यानी कि जब अकेला कर रहा है.
जब अकेला कर
structured activity is that he is not doing like that, but if even 3 or 5 minutes ना, तो वो करने लगता है. तो how can
माउथ पे टैप कर रहा है या टेबल पे टैप कर रहा है?
माउथ पे टैप कर रहा है.
माउथ पे टैप कर रहा है.
हाँ, यानी कि सेकंड हैंड ऑन द माउथ, यानी कि एक हाथ माउथ पे है, एक हाथ टेबल पे है.
हाँ, तो एक से लिख रहा है और एक से ऐसे टैपिंग चल रहा है.
नहीं, वो लिख लेता है, लिखने के बाद तुरंत ही वो टेबल पे एक हाथ से टैप कर रहा है, एक हाथ से माउथ पे कर
रहा है. तो वो उसका एक्साइटमेंट है. सो यू हैव टू गिव हिम स्ट्रेटजीज कि आपको अगर एक्साइटमेंट एक्सप्रेस करना है तो आप क्लैप कर लो, ठीक है, या मम्मा को बुला लो, मम्मा देखो, कम, वाओ मैंने अच्छा बनाया. ओके, सो रिप्लेस द बिहेवियर. सिर्फ आप उसको रिप्लेसमेंट दे दीजिए कि ऐसे नहीं हम क्लैप करेंगे. सो सपोज यू ड्रू समथिंग एंड यू आर हैप्पी टू सी इट, क्लैप. यू कम एंड स्टार्ट डूइंग इट. आप आके वो करना शुरू करो. जब उसने फिर अरे वाह वेरी गुड, नाउ जेंटली टेक हिज हैंड एंड स्टार्ट क्लैपिंग. ओके, तो उसको आपने रिप्लेस कर देना है. ये टिपिकली स्टिमिंग शो कर रहा है एक्साइटमेंट.
ओके,
सो जस्ट रिप्लेस.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. So with that, we come to the end of the session. Thank you everybody for joining.